Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Kiddushin Daf Ches. We are going to begin on Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines before the lines start getting wide, with the story of a Hugavra. There was a individual, was a man, the Akdish Bishiroi, seemed to do a really nice thing. As Kiddushin, because he knew he could be Mekadosh for Shava Pruta, or something of some monetary value, he gave her shiroyim. He gave her silk. He says, you do not need to make an appraisal, says Rashi. Shiashumu oisin moyim kaidim shemekablim, to evaluate it before it was given. No, it does need an appraisal. Why? Says Rashi, that if in fact you did not do the appraisal before he gave her this, it will not be a good Kiddushin. So now we have to understand the basis of this machlokas. If he said, just marry me with this b'choldehu as is, then in that situation, you don't need to say anything. As Rashi says, Hiskachili bahen kamo shehain. Marry me whatever it's worth. It was definitely worth a pruta. That's no question. The question is it worth $2 or $2,000? So that in itself is ambiguous. She's unsure. But if she was able to accept it as is, then it shouldn't make any difference. So they shouldn't argue in that case that L'chayr would be Kiddushin. So in that situation, they don't argue. You do not need a shuma. Idi armalei chamshin. If he said it's worth $50, v'loy shavi chamshin, really wasn't. So holo shava, it wasn't worth that amount. So she accepted it under false pretenses, and therefore it would not work. So keep plea where they argue. The omer chamshin v'shava chamshin. He said, until it's worth 50, and it actually was worth 50, but they didn't do the assessment, the appraisal before he gave it. So So it was later assessed, and it turned out to be how much he said, so that's good. It didn't need to have been pre-assessed before she received it. Rav Yosef Omer Tzrichi Shuma. No, it needed to have been evaluated before. Kivan de Isasa lo biki b'shuma. She's not an expert in assessing it when she received it. Therefore, it was samcha daita. Therefore, she was not samech das on what he is saying, that actually that's how much it's worth. That's one interpretation. Actually, even if you say, I'm giving this to you as is, they also argue. Rav Yosef Omer Shava Kesef Haruka Kesef. So when it comes to the din of Shava Kesef, it has to be the same thing as money itself. What's that? Ma Kesef Dekayitz, as we continue to Chesed Aleph, Av Shava Kesef Nami Dekayitz. So when it comes to Kesef, if you give $1, that has an established value. It's $1. So too, when you give Shava Pruta, it also has to be Dekayitz, that it has to be an established value before it was given. So it was actually understood how much it is. Amr Yosef min al-Minala. So that's a second interpretation. Let's look at question 12. Kiddush b'shiroi delo shamam tchila. It wasn't assessed before. But ez oifen pligi ba Rav Yosef uba my pligi. So either they argue where he said it was worth 50 and it was 50, whether she's semech das, or he said, marry me with this silk, kamo shehain, how much, whatever it's worth, as is. And the question is, do we say that Shava Kesef is like Kesef, that it needs kayetz, that it needs to actually be an established value before it was given? So Omer Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef, who said that the din is that srichi shuma, that you do need to evaluate it, mina mina. How do I know that that's the case? The pasuk says mikeseh miknasai. So as this pasuk says mikeseh miknasai, b'keseh hu nikna, you can be kinda with money. However, you cannot be kaina with tvua v'kelim. Now, what exactly is this referring to? So Rashi helps us a little and says mikes miknaso be'evid ivri ksiv. So when it comes to the acquiring of an evid ivri, you could give money, but you cannot be kaina if you give grain or vessels. So hai tavua v'kelim hechidami. What does it mean? Why doesn't it work if you give tavua v'kelim? Miknu bahu. If we're talking about that there's no kinyan, don't tell me that it means that you can't use it. It's not true, because it says Yoshiv Gulasai. It says Rashi, Yoshiv is Kroyiseru. It's extra, and the fact that it says it tells you that Le'inyan Pidyon, redeeming this Eved Ivri, it doesn't have to be necessarily with money, but you can also do it with Shavak Kesef. So don't tell me that it's excluding Tavua V'Kelim Legamri, because that's Shavak Kesef, and Shavak Kesef should work. Now, if you eat the lace, maybe it's because these things turn into Shavak Pruta, so my ear Tavua V'Kelim Avi Kesef Nami. So it has to be something of monetary value. If it's Pachas Shavak Pruta, so then why do you need to give us this example? Even my Kesef it wouldn't work. Elolav the Isbahu Shava Pruta. It must be that Tavua V'Kelim is a Shava Pruta. So why doesn't it work? Kivan Dolei Kansi Lo. But since it was not pre-assessed, it doesn't work. V'idach. So how does he get out of this? Hachikamer B'Tayris Kesef Hu Nikna. In a Nikna B'Tayris Tavua V'Kelim. You can use Kesef, something which has again monetary value, or Shava Kesef, but not something which is B'Tayris Tavua V'Kelim Aninhu Chalipin. So according to him, he's saying this is just alluding to chalipin, that it will not work when it comes to an evet ivri. So that's how we answer that. Says Rashi, it says that kesev ben shava kesev b'taris damimachnu, v'lo b'taris chalipin, shederch lasos chalipin b'tvu v'kelim. Apparently, why tvu v'kelim? So Rashi helps us out and says that chalipin is actually, that is the way that they would do chalipin, either with tvua or with kalim. As he quotes the pasuk in Rus by kalim, shlaf ish naloi, so that's a keli, tvua namik siv kol davar. So based on that, these are the things that are typically used for chalipin. Okay, so therefore it's just coming to say that you cannot be paid an eved ivri with chalipin. Rav Nachman yom repairs to avdi chalipin. According to Rav Nachman, Michael Maimor, says Rashi, Beperka Zav, it says, Peri ul avdi chalipin. Im nasan tevu b'taras chalipin, kamo suder liknois behen sadeh or shum davar b'chalipin, l'kanu. According to Rav Nachman, you can't use these things as chalipin, for chalipin. So, therefore, obviously, when it says to exclude tevu v'kelim, according to him, it's not referring to chalipin, because he holds these things would not work. Fine. So that's the question. So Elul Aylam delays Mushavar Pruta. So it must be really the Tvu V'Kelim, the reason why it doesn't work is nothing to do with because it wasn't evaluated. It's because it's not worth a Shavar Pruta. Adu Ka'abrid my area Tvu V'Kelim Avil Kesem Nami. So then why does it mention Tvu V'Kelim? Anything that's less than Shavar Pruta doesn't work. When it comes to just money, which again you take money to buy things, the space Shavar Pruta in iloloi, then it's tali on a Shavar Pruta. Avatuva Kalim Ema midim mekarva han yasaihu gomer machnin of shat navshe kamashmuon. That when it comes to the din of Teruva Kalim, since it's something in which you can get hanafim right away, maybe you would think even Pachas Meshavar Pruta would work. Okay, so even though again we tried to explain, according to Rabbi Yosef, the requirement that it must be the kayetz, based on this, we say that's not necessarily a raya. Okay, so let's look at question TA5. Mikasav miknaso bikasav hu nektav in a nektav b'tuv kalim. Ma hismait bezeh v'hari shava kasav kekasav. Right? So it actually asks for 3 answers. So what is this coming to exclude when it says Tivu v'kelim? So one could be, let's just write this down over here. B'kesav miknasa, b'kesav hu nikna, v'enu nikna, b'tivu v'kelim. So one possibility is that it's referring to that it was a shiva pruta, And what does it mean? Even though it was worth a sheva pruta, kivandul kayit kaitzi lo. That's one answer. Or we said maybe it was because of chalipin. Or the third is no, it's because it's talking about l'oylam deleis bahu sheva pruta, that it's not even a sheva pruta. So what's the chiddush by that? So, but you would think maybe a pocket of sheva pruta would work. Okay, that was question TA5. Let's say budul kaitzi. Shakavana she'enu nikna b'taras tevu v'kelim dehainu b'kin chalipin. It might be the leis bahu sheva pruta v'kamash malan, as we said. All right, TB5. Mikasa miknaso b'kesav hu nikna v'enu nikna b'tuva v'kelim maka mabo hapasik l'mayit. 3 answers. For some reason, I only got 2 of them right. Let's see what I wrote. Milin shedrachim l'kayitz. You need something. You need to evaluate it. Im ze pachas m'shever pruta v'savar v'kibla below dolom hana. Not exactly sure what I wrote there, but there again, it's talking about pachas m'shever pruta. But of course, I missed out, unfortunately, with the answer of chalipin. Okay. Dulukaitzi Indian pachas m'shever pruta chalipin. Right, that's the one I certainly missed. Okay. Right. So we don't have an answer either way. So so again, he's going to try to prove that he's correct, that it needed to be assessed. The Sanya. Egel zel opinion bani. So a person's willing to give an egel for pidyon haben for his child. Says Rashi, l'chamish shloim shel pidyon habachor. So that's what he wishes to use to redeem his son. Or he says talis zel opinion bani. He uses a talis. Lomer klum. He didn't say anything. Even Rashi says, even if he gave it to the kohen, egel zeh b'chamish salayim opinion b'ni, talis zu b'chamish salayim opinion b'ni, b'ni b'noi padoi. So in the Seifa, he mentioned how much it's worth. So he's given the same thing, but in the Seifa, apparently it's the kayitz. It must be that it has an established price. So high opinion hechidami. Shavi, if it's not worth anything, worth that amount, kol kimine. Certainly, you have to give the amount of chamish salayim or its value. Elolav afal gav the shavia v'kivan kaitzi lo. Even if it was worth the amount of 5 salayim, but it had to be assessed. Lo oyim do shavi. Maybe it really wasn't worth 5. So then, what's the chiddush? You have to give that amount to the kohen. You could go into kabel kohen iluye. In this situation, the kohen was makablet, even though it was less. So apparently, even if it's pachos mechamish slayim, if the kohen is makablet, that's good enough for pidyon ben. Ki had Rav Kahana shakel sudra mebei pidyon haben. That he was actually Rav Kahana. He was makabel a sudr, which apparently was not worth that amount of 5 slayim, and he accepted it. He said, to me, this is like it's worth 5 saloim. So Rav Ashi, okay, fine. Maybe he didn't have a kerchief to cover his head, and therefore, to him, it had the value of 5 saloim to be able to do that. But a typical person who's not so makbid, that would not work. Kihad the Marba Ravashi Zovan Sudra Mi'ime the Rabba Mikubi Shavi Asara Batlei Asar. Then we find that this individual that he purchased a Sudra from Mi'ime the Rabba Mikumi, purchased it from this name of a place, something which was only worth 10, but he paid more. He paid Tlei Asar 13. So therefore we see that a person would pay more. He wouldn't pay much more, but he would pay a little bit more. Okay, let's look at question 13. Either because it needs to be kayitz, or the reason why is because it wasn't worth 5 slayim. You could go into kabbalah the kohen v'kamash modul mahani. Interesting. Even though the kohen can say, I'm makabel. You don't have to give me the 5 slayim. The din is you still have to give 5 slayim. Omer Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Lezer says as follows: Hiskadshi le b'mana, he mekadosh me with 100, b'nosan law dinner, but he only gave a dinner. So he promised to give $100, but he only gave $1. Let's say harzim kadeshus v'yashlim. So the din is, it is a good Kiddushin, but he has to make sure to give the rest. So my taima, kivandi armula mana. So since he said he was going to give her 100, v'yovel dinner, he gave her $1. Kamandi armula almanastami. It's like he's saying that it's almanas that I give you the rest on condition. And we've mentioned many times in this gittin, the Amrav Huna Amrav Kol Amrav Manas Kamrav Machshav Dami. Anyone who says almanas, it's like you're saying now. Then the actual chalois of the Kiddushin takes place right away. So that's why. So Meisvei, for the Gemara, you tell me that's true. If a person says, I'm in Kadosh with 100, and he is counting the money, giving her all this money, let's say he has $100 bills, he's giving her $1, $2, and he keeps counting, she can retract, as well as he, even up to the last dollar. Now the question is, we just said that if he said, I'm going to give you 100, and he only gave $1, that it's a Kiddushin right away. So then why don't we say the same thing here? The Kiddushin L'chor should be Chal right away. Why is it that they have the ability to retract? The reason is because you said manazu. And once you said this mana, which is a stack of $100 bills, says Rashi, the daita kula. So her das was to get all 100. And therefore, until she got the 100, they could retract. Now, says the Gemara, so I'm going to save it, but manazu, if we're establishing that's the case of manazu, must be in contrast, reishta b'manastam. The Katani Seifa, the Seifa says, right? It already mentions that case. It already says in the Seifa, the language of manazu. The nimsa manachaser dinner. It turns out he gave her $99. Or dinner shalachayshis, or one of them was of copper, which is not of the same quality, and Mekadeshis. Dinner Ra, if he gave her a bad coin, which the Gemara's going to explain what that means, Harazim Mekadeshis v'yachlef. It is a good Kiddushin, but he has to give her a different coin. But that's the question. The question is, it's Beferish, the Seifa talks about a case of Zu. So how could you then tell me the Reish is also talking about a case of Zu? Mastama is talking about a case of Stam. And therefore you can't answer that the Reish is talking about Manazu. Reish says, well, Reish of a Seifa Diamr Manazu. They're both on Manazu. And Furush Yikam Afarish, and one's come to explain the second. If anyone wants to retract, they may. Okay, so therefore again, the reason is because since you said Manazu, this $100, this stack of $100 bills, so therefore her das is to receive all of them until she gets them all. It's not a Kiddushin. V'hachinami mistabra. This is also logical, says Rashi, the Perushin Mefarish, that the Gemara is just coming to explain the Reish and the Sefer, explaining one another. If the Reish is talking about Manastam, the Hashtam, but Manastam will have a Kiddushin. We're going to say it's not a Kiddushin up until the last one by Manastam, so Manazu Meboy, you don't even need to mention Manazu. So this sounds like almost Baz Devlim al Zeh. Area. According to that wouldn't answer, because Tana Seif Lagui Reisha. Sometimes, and in this case, the Seif is coming to explain the Reisha. Shaloi Timer, you shouldn't think, which of course is what we do say, that Reisha is B'manazu, of B'manastam Havi Kiddushin. So Tana Seif B'manazu, Mechal the Reisha B'manastam, V'afil Hachi will Havi Kiddushin. Okay? So therefore, you can't say, oh, it must be that way, that it's one's explaining the other, and it's all Manazu, because if it was Manastam and then Manazu, so then just mention Manastam. The problem is if you only mentioned one Manastam, then you would not necessarily make this inference. Again, why? Because you would maybe think the Reish is talking about Manazu, and only there you have the ability to retract. Manastam have a Kiddushin. But when it comes to Manastam, it is a Kiddushin, which of course that is what we hold. But Tana Seifa Manazu, the reason why it says in the Seifa Manazu, Machal the Reish Manastam, the Reish is Manastam, they feel like will have a Kiddushin. It's not a Kiddushin. Again, but that's not the case. The case, of course, is that we are being mechalik. Okay. Rashi and Ramana v'hoylach shani. The daita a kule high dinner. Rashi gives a totally different answer. He says that even in a situation, says Rashi, v'afgav the ermer b'manastam. It's no, even if you said manastam, so you would think maybe manastam. So if you give 100, so and you said 100, but you only end up giving her a dinner. So why does it work sometimes, and sometimes it's not a Kiddushin right away? So if you're counting the money, right, it's very clear that your das is to give her that money, right? And since that's what you're doing, so that's the reason why you could always retract. The fact that you're counting the money, in her mind, it's like, it must be he's giving me all the money. And therefore, even if he said manastam, but once she sees that he's counting the money, she's thinking, I'm going to get all that money. So it's not really totally on manastam or manazu, it's totally on the counting of the money. So if he's counting all this money, so that he can retract. If not, and all he does is give her dinner, then we say it is a Kiddushin right away. Okay. Now we explain the last part. Shel nechoshes, if out of the 100 he gave her 99, or one of them was nechoshes, it's not good. Now hechidami, if she sees and knows that it's nechoshes, chasav kibble, she accepted it. He gave it to her at night. In other words, she didn't know. She got 100 coins, but she didn't know that one of them was copper. Alternatively, inami dishtakach lebeini zuzi. It was found between the coins. The same basic answer, and if she didn't have any idea, it was just thrown in among the 100 coins. She didn't see it right away. She was not accepting it. So high dinner ra hechidam. He said if he gave her a dinner ra, so it's a good Kiddushin, he has to exchange it. So idul napik, if it's something that has no ability to be able to be spent, hainu dinner shalachayshus, like it has no value. So Amar Papa could go into napik alidei. It does have monetary value, but not always is it accepted. It's only accepted under certain circumstances. And then because of that, it's ra, and therefore, even though it does have value, but since not everyone accepts it, better that you should give her one that everyone will accept. Okay, question 14. Hiskachli b'manazu v'nimsa dinner ra mahadin. So he says like this: Idol napik, if you can't use it in a mekudeshes. Idin napik alidei chak. If it's just difficult, it's not always used, then it's mekudeshes. However, v'yachlef, you have to exchange it. Okay. Fine. Weiter. Omer Rav Nachman Omer La. If he says to her, "Hiskachli b'mana, I want to be mekadosh you with $100, v'heniach la mashkain, and aleha in mekudeshes, and he leaves a mashkain." So he gives her collateral, right? Now, collateral, what does that mean? Is it really the person? If let's say you have a malva, as we continue Chesed and Beis, that lends $1,000, and he takes a mashkon from the lova, so does that person really have it? So the Gemara says not really. Chesed and Beis, mana ein kan. She didn't get the money, and mashkon ein kan. Says Rashi, hilkach mashkon einu shava. It's not worth anything. Klum. She'ein hamashkain matana, because it's not for hers to keep. It's just collateral. It's safekeeping, and therefore, because he didn't really, it's like he didn't give her something. He's just having her hold on to something, but it's not really hers. Mana inkan, mashkin inkan. Eisvei Ravo Rav Nachman. So he asks a question: Kitchen mamashkin mekudeshes. What is the din when it comes to a mashkin? If you give a collateral, l'chayra, we see it is mekudeshes. No hasam b'mashkin decherem. When we're dealing with the mashkin b'cherem, says Rashi, shahaya b'yadai v'kidsha b'chayv sheish l'olav hilkach mekudeshes shamashkin atzma kenuyala. It's a mashkin of others. Rav Yitzchak, the Rabbi Yitzchak, when I know bal chayv shekayna mashkin, that the din actually is the bal chayv is kind of the mashkon. It's like they actually own the mashkon. So therefore, in this situation, the mashkon is is acceptable because it's considered to be like that person's, and therefore, since that person has ownership, therefore she's receiving something of value. How do we see that a person who's holding the mashkon actually is koined? Rabbi Yitzchak. That if you give it back to this poor person, he needs a pillow at night or whatnot, it's a kind, charitable thing. Now, we have this many times. How could the Torah tell you, oh, you're doing a great tzedakah? If it's not yours, so you got to give it back to him, right? So it must be that it really isn't his anymore. It's yours. And therefore we see, because you're kind of the mashka. And therefore, if you give it back to the ani, so that's a nice thing to do. B'nei Rav Huna bar Ovin, Zovin amasa beprite. So we find that this maidservant was sold beprite, says Rashi, almanas l'kal pruto shel nechoshas, in order to be able to accept these copper coins. However, lo have b'hadayu, those coins were not around. Osive nascha aleha, and therefore they gave, as Rashi says, a chaticha shel kesef, this bar of silver, like as a mashkon, to say, I'm going to pay you back. Sof iyaker amata. Eventually, the maidservant became worth more. Now the question is, if I purchased the maidservant, if in fact that maidservant is mine, we already agreed on a price before the price of the maidservant went up. So you didn't pay it, and the mashkon of the chaticha shel kesef doesn't have any meaning, and therefore you have to pay the higher price. Says Rashi. Okay, Tanabam. Hiskanchili b'mana, marry me with his $100. Nataltoi v'zarkasol yom. So she takes it and throws it into the sea. Or into fire, l'chol davar, ha'aved, and anything that's destroyed. Probably not the nicest way to start a marriage. And mikdeshes. That will not work. Mashma what? Hashedisinhu kamei. If she took the ring and just chucked it right on the ground and threw it on the ground, Havi Kiddushin, then in fact that would be a good Kiddushin. Hakamrele shakul beina. It's clear by her action she's saying, I don't want to marry you. Right? Thank you for the ring, but you can take it back. So Loma boy Kaimer. Loma boy Kamar. Loma boy Shedisinhu kamei. Obviously, if she takes it and throws it back at him, they'll have a Kiddushin, because it's clear by her intentions there's nothing else you can possibly interpret over here except that I don't want to marry you. Or if she throws into the sea or into a fire, since I'm mechayev in it, says Rashi, lashlume, I'd have to pay him back. So Gamra Bekidsha, Nafsha, I guess I better marry the guy. Lafishu Shalah, because it's hers. So Rakasal Lanasa says Edzeh Imhu Ragzon. She was again, we're gonna see she was testing him, as we'll see in the Gemara. But she's basically saying, I'm throwing it out over here, so if it's not a good Kiddushin, I'm gonna have to pay him back, right? So I really want to marry him. So why'd she do this? So Savra Ebdike Haigar, I want to test him. Iraschanahu Olo. Kamashmon. I want to see, is he an angry person or not? Right? Again, it's interesting because you're married to him anyway, right? But the only reason why you're doing it is to see whether or not he's an angry person, right? So, but you really want to be married to him? No. The reality is, that's not a Kiddushin either. So we can't think that perhaps is a situation where a person may have actually wanted this to have taken place. Okay, Tanobam. Hiskachili b'mana. Marry me with $100. And she says to name Abba Avicha, give it to my father, give it to your father, and Mikudeshes. Almanashi kabumli Mikudeshes. In order that they should accept it from me, then it's a Kiddushin. Fine. So Tana Abba, why does she mention your father, my father? Hadicha koyach the Reisha, to show the koyach of the Reisha that even though she says give it to my father, a woman wouldn't say that, and therefore it's clear that she was not interested in marrying him. Tana Avicha hadicha koyach the Seifa. The case of the Seifa, where it is a Kiddushin, so we say that's a Chiddush because even though you're giving it to your father, to the man's father, the father-in-law, nonetheless, it's still a good Kiddushin. Let's look at this Rashi. Einu Mekudeshes, ve'einu doime l'tein mana l'ploini. It's not comparable to the case of giving money to this guy, the Kaddish l'cha, and I'll be married to you, which we said is like a din arev. Why? Because in that case, she initiated the conversation. The hasim ihi ka'amrle mikar. She said it. Abul Khan mishatehi boy. Here she's like joking around with him. Kalaimer tain ma'oyischal achem. Just give the money to someone else. Not interested in marrying you. So the Rashi the Reisha the Afgav the Avia, who even though it's her father, will gamer b'kitchenafshe koyach the Seifa the Amar Mikudeshes, that it is good. The Afgav the lo karv shalahu, even though it's not her karov, well, it's her father-in-law, it's still good. Fine. Hiskachili b'mana to name l'ploini. Mi mekadesh me with this money, and she says give it to so and so. Any mikudeshes. Almanashi kablimli mikudeshes. So she says on condition that they're makablet from me, that is kedushin. Sricha. Yashmin abav avicha, where it's not good. Hasam hu dechi amra almanas she kablimli have a kedushin. Maybe only there where she says almanashi kablimli that it's a good kedushin. The samcha daita lui savra abdinli shlichusai, that because these are relatives, so she's saimich that they're going to do the shlichus of a ploni lo, but it's talking about a ploni, so some other stranger, so maybe not. Yashmin and ploni hachahu dechi amar tenela ploni will have a kedushin. Maybe when she said give it to that stranger that clearly is not a good kedushin, the lo mikarva daita gabe, she has no connection to this guy. Why would you want to give some stranger a gift? Maybe in that situation, because it's your father or it's your father-in-law potentially, so you'd be willing to give them as a gift, and therefore maybe that was your intention. Therefore, you really do want to be married. Kamash Muan, it's not a good kedushin. Tanabah. She says, you say, $100, put it on this rock. However, if it was her rock, then it would work. Why? It says Rashi, shechatzero shel adam kaina v'haru kamoshe mikabaltoi, which we saw in Paraka Zayrik and Gittin, that if you throw a get and it lands in her chutzner, so that's like a dinyad, it's like hers. So too, when it comes to Kiddushin, if a rock, which is hers, the Kiddushin falls onto it, it's a good Kiddushin. What if they both own the rock? So that we don't know. His skachli bekikar. So he says, marry me with some bread. So today will kill it. She goes, throw it to the dogs. But if it was her dog, then it's a good kedushin because he's doing her a favor. He's giving her benefit by feeding her animals. What if you have a stam, a dog chasing her? Mahu. He says, I see you're about to get bit by this pit bull. I'm going to throw you this bread. So maybe it's a good kedushin because she gets hana. She could say, what do you mean? It's not else marriage. Any person should save someone's life. And therefore, the fact that you did this for me should not constitute a valid kedushin. Teku. His skachli bekikar, marry me with this bread, and she says tenil ani, give it to the poor. Any mikdashes. Now feel ani hasamachla, even if it's a poor person who typically goes to her. My taima amalei, because she can simply say ki hechi to mechayv nabei ana hachi mechayves be'at. Just like I am obligated to help the poor, you also are obligated to help the poor too. Okay, I think we have one question over here. question TB6. I got it right, which is great. Hiskad shili bekiker tinula kelev. Give it to the dog. Be'ez oifen havi iboya. So it's the case of the running dog. Iboy delev shita. You have a Kiddushin. Umehem study the iboy. Let's see what I wrote. Im kelev rots achareha. Ulai mikadeshes bahana. Can't read that word. Hatsala minishichas kelev. She was saying I'm getting bit. Ohu mechuyev l'hatzel kol adam shuba makom sakana. Ve'enu mikadeshes teku adkan.